Hello there, my name is Jason Schmaltz and I'm an AMGA single pitch instructor, and today I'm going to talk to you about all things carabiners. And I've been really excited to make this video because there's so many carabiners out on the market right now, and they have so many different kinds of features and different weights and sizes, and it's really difficult and daunting to figure out, hey, which one do I need to buy, or which ones do I need to buy for the style of climbing I'm doing. So I hope by the end of this video you'll be educated to go out and make good decisions on purchasing and utilizing carabiners in whatever type of climbing you're doing. For this video, I'm going to use the full line of Trango Carabiners. So you can see Trango's logo right there, and they have a pretty well balanced line of carabiners. It's not overly burdensome with a million of them, but it definitely has enough of them to cover kind of all uses, or at least all uses as it relates to rock climbing and the rock climbing that I do. So we'll kind of use their line to kind of illustrate some different features and functions of carabiners. The first thing I want to talk about for carabiners is the anatomy of them. And there's several different parts of carabiners, but I'm going to kind of highlight four of the main parts. So the first and probably one of the most important parts of the carabiner is the spine. So you can get a look at the spine right there up close. And this is a really important part of the carabiner because this is what is absorbing the load when the carabiner is in its normal configuration. So normally something will be hooked here, and the force will pull apart, and it's that spine that keeps those things from pulling the carabiner completely apart. The second anatomy part of the carabiner I want to talk about is the basket. Okay, and that's this part of the carabiner where you will normally put in like rope or a sling or whatever is going to be getting hooked to this carabiner and then used to load it. We'll talk about different size baskets, but a couple of things to look at on a basket is it's the area that you have to clip things into. Some are pretty wide, like this HMS Carabiner, and some can be quite small, like this little D-ring carabiner. So you can see the difference there, and we'll talk about why that is. The second thing to think about is the geometry of it in regards to the rope surface. So a good illustration of that is these two D-ring carabiners. You can see the basket is roughly the same length, but you can see one is kind of pointed like this right here, and then one is kind of flat across that area. So it's kind of two different applications there, and you'll want to know, hey, why would I use one over the other as we go forward. The third piece of geometry of a carabiner is the gate. And so that's the thing that opens and closes. And there's two kinds of gates. There's locking and non-locking, and that's from the high level. So you can see this gate can be locked shut with a screw gate, while this gate right here cannot be locked. And so that's how they're mainly differentiated. Of course, there's subsets of each of those. And then the last part of the anatomy of a carabiner is the nose, and that's the part that the carabiner gate hooks to right there. So you can see this nose has kind of like a key, but it's kind of interesting to see this nose versus this nose. You can see this one has like a tooth on it. So that's a little bit different, and why that wire gate carabiner has that versus the HMS Carabiner not having that, and some pluses and minuses for that. So we'll talk about that as well through the video. The second thing I'd like to talk about in this video as it relates to carabiners is the ratings, specifically the forces that the carabiners are rated for. And before I get too far into that, I'd just like to differentiate that most ratings as it comes to force in climbing are rated in kilonewtons. Kilonewtons are kind of hard for us to relate to, so in some of these ratings I'll convert those to mass, but understand that a force is just a mass times an acceleration. And the reason that we use that in climbing is because not every force is static. right? So some of the forces are from lead falls where there's an acceleration. And so it's important to have it rated in a force metric. But since our brains equate a little bit more to static loads in some of these things, I'll convert from kilonewtons to what that equates to in a static load. Okay, so you can kind of see. Just for quick reference, 1 kilonewton is converted to a static load roughly of 220 pounds, roughly. It's maybe just a little bit more. But anyway, you can kind of use that as a quick reference, even when you're out climbing, to make a quick judgment. Okay, so on the carabiner, there's 3 different forces typically shown on the spine of what the carabiner is rated for. The first one is the force in the normal arrangement, which is the carabiner closed. I'll go ahead and lock this one. The carabiner closed, and then the forces pulling on opposite ends of the spine. And you can see for this HMS Carabiner, the rating is 25 kilonewtons. So that's an incredible amount of force that the carabiner can hold. The second force that it shows on the spine is the cross loading across the minor axis. So if your carabiner is arranged like this while you're belaying, and maybe it gets switched around, and the load is experienced on the spine and in the gate, it can hold, I think for this one, it's 8 kilonewtons, okay, when it's cross-loaded. And a lot of people freak out about cross-loading, but you can see even at 8 kilonewtons, you can still hold quite a bit of force. You know, it's definitely important to try to keep the carabiner in its normal arrangement, but 8 kilonewtons is still a lot. So that's something to just be mindful of. And then the last rating that you can see on the spine is for if the gate is opened and you fall on the carabiner in its normal arrangement, so where the spine is loaded with the gate open. And you can see for this carabiner it's 7 kilonewtons. Some of these carabiners are a little bit more, just depending on their geometry and the way they were constructed. Typically you're not going to find that, but sometimes if you're clipping and you only get something half clipped or something like that, you know, you could potentially fall on a half open carabiner, but obviously you want to avoid that. At the end of the day, it's important for you to understand when you're buying carabiners that these forces are listed out for you. You should check them and make sure they make sense to you. Most carabiners, no matter what type they are going to be in the range that I just read off to you. The real key is if you don't see these ratings on the spine, they are not rated for climbing. So if you go to Walmart or Target and buy some carabiner that you use to just clip your keys on and you don't see any ratings on there, you know, don't bring that to the crag for climbing. I advise you to not bring any carabiners that are not rated for climbing to the crag, because you don't want to risk mixing them up with carabiners that are, and then accidentally load one that's not meant to be loaded. The best example I can think of is some people have those little carabiners on their chalk bag. You know, leave those at home. You know, get a little wire gate or something like that for that chalk bag. It's not much more weight, and then you won't risk getting mixed up with something. Now when it comes to carabiners, there's 2 main classes. There's locking carabiners like this one, and then there's non-lockers like this one that cannot lock their gate shut. But I'm going to focus firstly on talking about the locking carabiners, because there's more diverse and more numerous features when it comes to locking carabiners, so I want to try to clear up some of the main features. The first feature that you'll see on different locking carabiners is there's different kinds of gates, or locking mechanisms on the gates, I should say. So the most common is the screw gate, where you close the carabiner and you screw, in most cases they say screw down so you don't screw up. So you screw the carabiner down and screw it till it's shut, and that's locked now. And then when you want to open it, you will screw it back up and you can open the carabiner. In general, I want you to see this geometry of a locking HMS carabiner inverted like this. This is normally how you want to arrange a carabiner on an anchor system or something like that, where it's ready to receive something. This is a good kind of geometry for receiving something, locking it, and going on with your climbing or whatever you're doing. The second mechanism is what's called an auto lock. So this is a spring-loaded gate. So if I close it and let it go, it just spring loads closed. Okay, so this is nice. I don't actually even need to hold it while it closes. It'll just close and close the gate and screw shut automatically by itself. These are really nice for kind of critical operations like belaying or something like that, where you want to always make sure that the carabiner is shut. So that's what I like to use those for. You want to be selective though where you use these, because a lot of times it can require two hands, when it gets busy on an anchor system or something like that. And also they're heavier than the screw lock. So you don't want to be cumbersome with a bunch of automatically closing or spring-loaded closing carabiners. You just want to think about the operations that you would really need those for. And then the last mechanism for a locking carabiner is it's called the triple lock carabiner. So similar to the auto lock, but there's actually a third point of movement required. So you can see there's this little ball here that I can't just twist this gate like I could with the auto lock. So I actually have to lift it up, that's the first move, then twist it open, that's the second move, and then open it, and that's the third move. You can use these on some critical operations like top rope systems or something like that, where you're not going to see the carabiner for a long time, or if you can use them for clients who are not going to have a figure of 8 directly onto their climbing loop, but instead you want to use a carabiner for whatever reason. I've seen these on like auto belays and stuff like that at the gym. So you could use them on things like that that you maybe won't be able to see all the time, but you want to make dead sure that they're always shut. So that's why I would recommend utilizing these. Not a lot of usage for maybe the recreational climber for this, but you may want to use this for your ATC for rappelling or something like that. That may be an option versus auto lock. So something to think about. Now when it comes to locking carabiners, there's two main types of locking carabiners. We talked about the gate mechanism, but there's two main types of locking carabiners. One is the HMS Carabiner, so it looks like that. It's the big one with a big basket. That's how you know it's HMS Carabiner. It's got this big pear shape with this big basket right here. A lot of surface area right there for all kinds of different rope stuff to go into. And then the second type of locking carabiner is what's called a D-shaped carabiner, or maybe some people would call it a D-ring carabiner, but I call it a D-shaped carabiner. And you can see it's smaller than an HMS carabiner, and it's kind of more shaped like a D than a pear. I don't know, you tell me what you think. But anyway, that's what they're called. I'll talk about the HMS carabiner first. HMS stands for a fancy German word that ultimately means Munterhitch, and that's what these can really be used for, as opposed to the smaller D-shaped carabiners, is allowing a munter to be hooked up to the carabiner like this, and then you can belay through. But then what's key, I would normally lock that down, is that that knot can easily pass through the carabiner if I flip it. Okay, so that's how the HMS carabiner got its name originally. But these are really good all around. These can be used for just about every role of a locking carabiner. So it's really good to have a couple of them while you're climbing, whether it's to use for clipping in, or sometimes I use these even for like a master point when I'm climbing on like a girth hitch type master point. And the other thing that's really nice about this one in particular, it's got really rounded sides, so that helps with like an ATC to feed smoothly through it during a rappel. The drawback of the typical HMS carabiners, they're quite heavy, and they take up a lot of space on your rack. Now, Trango actually has two HMS carabiners. This is their kind of normal one, and then this one is called the Physique. or Physic. I don't know how they pronounce it, but it has all the HMS features, but you can see it has this I-beam construction instead, which allows it to be just as strong, actually in some cases stronger than the normal HMS Carabiner, but then also be lighter. So that's one of the advantages of this one versus the normal HMS Carabiner. I think this weighs 78 grams versus I think this one's like 91 grams. So you can get about 18% or so weight savings, which may not seem like much on an individual basis, but if you consider trying to save weight on multiple components, it can really kind of add up. So that's something to think about. The second type of locking carabiners I'll talk about now is the D-shaped carabiners, and so Trango has two of them. So I'll talk about this one first, but basically what you're going to get with a D-shaped carabiner versus an HMS carabiner is a much more streamlined and lighter version of a locking carabiner. Now, the advantage of these is they're lighter, and that, not having to carry 5 or 6 of these versus maybe 1 or 2 of these, and the rest D-shaped carabiners is going to make a big difference in your climbing belt's weight. But the disadvantage of these is there's not much room here in the basket for rope management stuff. Now, one of the D-ring carabiners that Trango has is called this Superfly Evo, and this carabiner has a decent sized basket. I wouldn't want to put a munter on this and try to pass a knot through there. That gets quite cumbersome, but you can potentially use it for a clove hitch. So you can see this clove hitch fits on it pretty nice. So if I want to use this for clipping in, that could be an option if I'm trying to save weight on my multi-pitch climbing. And then the second D-shaped carabiner that they have is called the React Carabiner. So it looks like it's a little bit more narrow at the end of the basket versus the Superfly Evo. So this one's better for like just clipping 2 different types of rope or sling or something like that to each end. You can see it's got this notch in each end to try to hold that in place, which I like. I like to use this for when I'm climbing. I'll use it for my gris-gris for belaying, and then when I'm rappelling, I'll use it for my third hand. So it can have kind of 2 functions, and it can be shared, so I don't have to have 2 carabiners for that. I can have 1 light one. Just to give you the idea of weight difference, the Superfly Evo is 53 grams, and then the React is 50 grams versus 78 grams and 91 or 92 grams for the big HMS carabiners. So you can see, there's definitely some weight to be saved, especially, if you have to have quite a few locking carabiners on your waist for whatever reason, for whatever you're doing. So always good to think through, hey, why do I need an HMS carabiner versus a D-ring or a D-shaped carabiner, and be able to make some choices from there. So now that I've talked a little bit about locking carabiners, I'll talk about the non-locking carabiner options and why you would want these versus the lockers. So the great thing about the lockers is super safe. They can be used in all safety critical and non-safety critical areas, but they're quite heavy and quite cumbersome versus the non-lockers. These are just so much lighter and so much sleeker and smaller profile. You can see the difference in profile right there. So you really want to try to use non-lockers where it makes sense. And the 2 main areas where you'll use non-lockers is in clipping applications and then in redundant systems. So a lot of times I'll use them in anchor building where the whole system is redundant and I'm clipping to say like 2 bolts on an anchor station. It's okay to use non-lockers on those, especially if you're going to be right there on like a multi-pitch or something like that. The only reason I would maybe use lockers on bolts like that, on a station like that, is if I was setting up something for a lot of people to climb on. But even then I would consider maybe one of them non-locker and one with a locker and call that good. The 2 types of non-lockers that you'll see are the wire gate non-locker, and this is the Trango Phase. And this wire gate is probably the most commonly used type of carabiner because there's just so many clipping applications when it comes to quick draws, alpine draws, trad gear, clipping in nuts and things like that. This is just what's used because it's the lightest type of carabiner you can have, and therefore that's what you're going to be using in a lot of those applications. The second type of non-locker is the solid gate carabiners, and you can see there's two arrangements. There's a straight gate and a bent gate, and these are better used in kind of performance quick draws. So the straight gate will be what's clipped to the anchor or bolt, and then it's the bent gate that's basically made to clip a rope in easily, and this is just so quick to clip a rope into that bent gate versus a wire gate. You can see it's just a little bit, it's not a lot, but it's just a little bit more cumbersome for me to take the rope in and out. One reason is you have this tooth versus the non-tooth nose. This tooth is necessary on a wire gate to just maintain the rating versus this toothless gate, or toothless nose, I mean. But that's the main purpose of these non-wire, these solid gate non-lockers. And the wire gate is probably the most common non-locking carabiner, and it's the most lightest, and it can be used for clipping basically all your gear. I use it for clipping all my cams and all my alpine draws and everything to my waist belt. You can see that the wire gate has this kind of tooth for a nose, which can be a little bit cumbersome and get caught on things, but that's what's needed for this carabiner to maintain its rating when it's tested on a load. So that's why that's there versus the solid gate. The other type of non-locking carabiner, which is the solid gate, comes in kind of two variations. One is a bent gate and one is a straight gate. And the main application for these versus the wire carabiners is in basically performance sport climbing. So you would use these to be on a quick draw, and you would have the straight gate clip into the bolt that was attached on the wall, and then the bent gate would be utilized for clipping into the rope. And you can see this is just very quick to clip and unclip versus the wire gate. The wire gate, you can still do it, and you can see I can still do it pretty fast, but it's not as fast as this bent gate. Okay, so when you're red pointing, or just sport climbing where weight isn't as critical as in trad climbing, you can use these. If I'm only going to have 6 or 8 quick draws versus a double set of cams and then alpine draws and everything else, having a little bit more weight on this React carabiner versus the phase wire gate carabiner is going to help me in performance. Hey, I hope you found this video on carabiners useful. There's just a lot of features and different kinds to buy, and I wanted to make this video so that you could kind of make sense of it all when you went to purchase carabiners and buy the right carabiners for the activity that you're doing. But if you have any questions, based on what I talked about, or even stuff that I didn't talk about as it relates to carabiners, feel free to leave it in the comments. And if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to our channel for more tutorials and some different adventures that I go on and cover with my camera and stuff. And we'll see you out at the crag. Have a good one.